thanks for participating and joining our first webinar, which is really exciting, focusing on smartphone eye tracking and how it can be used to benefit your research. I will start with a very quick background on Oculid, the company that's hosting this webinar. We are a startup that is dedicated to support other companies in understanding how users interact with their products, brands, and services. And all that is done on mobile phones. And as you might have guessed, it does involve a lot of eye tracking. We were founded in Berlin in 2018. We are currently 11 people working at Oculid and 3 founders who actually have a background in user experience and human-computer interaction. We met at the Technical University of Berlin and have always done eye tracking in our research career in the past, and then decided to spin off from the university and found Oculid. Stefan, who is hosting this webinar with me, Antje, is also a co-founder, so we're both co-founders of the company and both co-CEOs. I will be doing most of the talking during this webinar. I will be presenting the content, and Stefan will be having an eye on the questions that are coming in and doing his best to answer those. Yeah, the topic is smartphone eye tracking and how it can benefit your research. I will jump into a brief theoretical introduction of this in a minute. And at the end of this, this theoretical introduction, we will be answering questions. So we would be happy if you kept your questions coming in via the Q&A form for everything that relates to the content of the webinar, so that Stefan can have an eye on that and prioritize it. And please use the chat function for any technical issues and everything else that you might want to share. Maybe important to say this session is being recorded, so if you want to keep your participation a secret, please use the anonymous chat and Q&A function. I'm not sure whether it will actually show up in the recording anywhere, but just to be sure. Yeah, good. So then let's jump into the content that you are actually here for. So before I start on why eye tracking and why smartphone eye tracking is such a benefit from our perspective, I would like to quickly go over what is being done in UX testing and market research these days very often. And at least from what we observe, there's a lot of research being done on subjective data and on behavioral data. And there's a lot of really good methodologies for these. People use a lot of interviews, a lot of questionnaires to gather people's opinions, attitude towards products and digital campaigns. There's a lot of behavioral measurements going on. I guess you know about all of these, like customer journeys being studied, A/B testing being done live and experiments, and it reveals a lot about how people interact with a product and how they feel towards it. But we also believe that it leaves out, in many cases, one big component that you might actually want to study and often just do not have the resources to do. So the buzzword that's often used here is methodological triangulation. So looking at a user or a client from as many different perspectives as you can be doing. And we believe that one of these perspectives that you would want to take into account is, next to behavioral data and subjective data, actually data that reveals you something about the perception and cognition of your users, your customers, the people that you want to study. Perception and cognition are two very broad terms. What do we mean with that when we talk about it? So perception and cognition is everything that relates to sensory information that is being taken in, can be via all different modalities, hearing, seeing, touching. Some of this is conscious, some of that is processed subconsciously, some of that goes on to attract the users or the customer's attention, but not all of it does. And whatever does not attract the attention is naturally very hard to study by conventional methods. It also contributes towards decision-making, and so it is worth studying all these contexts, all these different stages when you want to learn more about the interaction of your user and your product. With eye tracking on smartphones, we concentrate very much on the sensory intake via the eye, of course. But we believe that it is much more than that, than just the sensory input from one modality, because 80% of information that a user or a person processes in the brain that comes from the sensory input actually comes from the eye, from the visual input. And that is particularly true when you have a very visual task, as you would usually have when you interact with a digital product or a digital campaign. So amongst the sensory input that's coming from the eye is really very important and makes up the largest chunk of information that the brain processes. But then actually what you want to derive from this when doing eye tracking is not so much where is the eye of a person in a given point in time. That's interesting in itself, but what you actually want is that tells you something about what is going on in the user's brain. And the eye in many cases really is considered like a window to the user's brain. We have a couple of assumptions underlying that, which reveal more about how gaze input, eye input is related to cognitive functions. I briefly want to go through this. The first assumption is very straightforward, I would say. It actually states that the gaze position is where the user's or the customer's attention is. So whatever I look at when I have a visual task that people are interacting with reveals me where is their focal attention, what are they currently processing in their brain. And moreover, in the second assumption, it is stated that dwell, so focusing on one element or one object with your eye, reveals something about the processing duration. So how long do I need to mentally work on the element that I'm looking at? A famous example for this comes from reading studies, for example, where we observe that not so frequent words, often words from different languages in texts, are focused on much longer than words that appear often in written language. And that is because we need longer time to process that item. So focusing on something for longer means it is being worked on longer in the human brain. The third assumption that we are making is that gaze distribution, be it spatially or temporally, reveals something about the sequence of processing. So when I look at object A and then move my gaze to object B, that actually means that I take in the information of object A and use that to process object B. So it reveals in what sequence information is sampled and subsequently also processed in the brain. I guess that's pretty straightforward. And you might then wonder, given these advantages and what eye tracking is revealing, not just about the eye, but about cognition and processing of elements, why is it actually not used that much more? Because I would assume that most of you, let's see, I would assume that the majority of people who are attending this webinar have not used eye tracking before. So Agatha will start a poll on that. And I'm really curious to see whether that's actually true. We believe that the main reason why eye tracking is not being used more often these days is because in the classic implementation, eye tracking comes with external devices. So we have often infrared devices that are attached to screens. If you want to study something that is going on a screen, an advert or a digital product, or you have these glasses that you see here in this one picture where you have built-in infrared cameras that are used to extract the position of the eye. I will not go into the exact technical details, but it have been fairly complex setups that have been used to do eye tracking. And yeah, I see here most people have used eye tracking before in the past, so that's interesting. I guess you can see it too. Yeah, still, it has been fairly complex to set it up. It has been expensive, like the devices that you have just seen that were or that are being sold by the big manufacturers easily cost up to 20,000 euros. So that is expensive to just get the hardware in the first place. But it is also expensive because it is time consuming. So once you get one of these systems, you usually would not buy more than maybe 2 of them. So you have participants coming individually into a lab where you have set up this test, where you have spent usually a lot of time on integrating different data sources, matching what synchronizing what you want to test with the eye tracking devices. And it does require a fair amount of expertise and experience in setting up these systems. So you have to adjust them in the right angle for each participant. So you really needed to practice a lot to get valid data with these devices. And even then, things might have gone wrong in some cases. So bottom line, eye tracking has just not been widely available to people up to now. Not every person who would have been interested in this topic had the means to actually go and conduct eye tracking studies. And that is what we think should actually be changed. And what we see is changing with eye tracking being done with integrated sensors. So while external hardware, which you see at the left of this arrow, still is the main source how it's being done, we see that more and more is also moving to integrated sensors. There are some options of doing webcam eye tracking on desktop PCs. There's special camera eye tracking emerging with often true depth and 3D cameras of specific high-end phones. And what we are seeing now, and actually what we do at Oculid, is implementing eye tracking on selfie cameras of everyday smartphones. I mean, the advantage of this is that every smartphone these days has a selfie camera. And if you can use that which is already built in to conduct studies, you can actually get access to a very broad base of testers, and you overcome a lot of the restrictions being related to costs that you have had in the past, and also being like limited to the lab setting which comes with its own problems. So we focus at Oculid and also in this webinar on smartphones, because we see that more and more online activity, be it e-commerce, be it information sampling, social media, is moving from the desktop to mobile phones. And we also see that more and more research with the pandemic, I guess I don't have to tell anybody, has moved from the lab to remote settings. And that is only really possible when you use integrated sensors and have a setup where people can conduct eye tracking studies at home. So that's why smartphone eye tracking is the main focus of this webinar. And I hope I have given you some introduction to why that would be interesting and how it could be conducted. This is sort of the first part of the webinar. Do we have any questions up to here, Stefan? No. Okay, then I briefly drink a sip, and then I would like to jump to the main focus of this webinar, which will be use cases in which to apply eye tracking and how you can benefit from it in your research. Okay, just a second. I'm switching to the platform in which I want to present. Or actually not, because I just remembered that I give an introduction to the use cases before I jump to the platform. So in principle, all different kinds of studies can be conducted on smartphones. For example, you can run mobile usability tests. You can run advertising tests, advertising in context. You can run video content tests, shopping tasks, or also packaging tests. And the first example that I would like to give comes from this market research area and packaging tests that are very popular. So the question of this use case that I would like to present is how much attention does the packaging of a newly created smoothie brand receive compared to others, and what it is influenced by. This is a relevant question because we know from the literature that people look longer and on packaging of brands that they know, that they are familiar with. I find it a bit counterintuitive. I think you would think that people explore more what they don't know yet, but this is just not the case. But also from the literature, we know that the design of the packaging can counter these effects. So if you have a very suitable design that appeals to people or that people find interesting, your packaging might attend the same amount of attention in a shelf, for example, than packaging of competitors does, even though they are more known. If we think back of the methodological triangulation, I think it is very important to stress that even also in such a question, I would not think it is worthwhile only applying eye tracking, but also looking at task duration, questionnaires to also gather information about behavior. and opinion attitude of people by a questionnaire. This packaging test that I'm presenting here is a test that was run within our platform, and this is like the analysis part of the platform that you see here, but it was not actually conducted by us, but by the HTW, which is a University of Applied Science here in Berlin, and more specifically by the marketing chair there of Professor Lüthers. And the experiment is a master's thesis run by Shinto Joy. So in this experiment, in this study, people were presented with 6 different smoothie packages on their smartphone. So people were sitting at home, downloaded an app in which they opened this test setting, and subsequently, after some instructions, looked at different packagings that they were supposed to study. They were each time given a short introduction. And here we see the data of one participant who looked at the packaging. I have said that we will be seeing tabs in the video in a second, and also like a screen recording overlaid with the gaze points of the person that is running this test. I set the playback speed a little slower than it has actually been during the experiment, so that you can start, like, have a little more time to view it. We're starting with package 4 to make it not too long. And after the person has seen the different packages that are still to come, there will be a questionnaire which is answered by the participant to also gather this data on attitude and opinion. So I start the recording, and there it can be of interest to see, for example, just what do people focus on first, to have some side questions. What do they look at the branding? Do they look at images? And that may also vary by packaging, just to give you something to look out for when watching the video. Which does not play. I'm sorry for that. That's probably my computer. So I hope you see the recording here. Stefan nods, so I assume you do. Unfortunately, I recorded this at full speed, so you will have to watch closely. Yeah, so this is one of the packages. And you see the gaze dot where people focus. They complete the task. And then there's the next package. So the first one that we saw is a lesser known brand, while this one is a well-known brand. This is a lesser known brand again. And people complete the task and then start a survey here in this task, in which they are answering questions on their attitude towards smoothies in general and the specific smoothies that they have been seeing during the experiment. So this is more to provide an overview, like what the task was. Yes, Stefan? You are muted though.
There's one question in the chat that's maybe interesting to the rest. Like somebody wants to know what the tasks were for the test you just showed.
So the tasks were simply to look at the packaging and then go on when you have studied the packaging. So people were able to stop the tasks when they thought that they had gotten a good impression of the packaging. So I think it's also visible in the video. Just a second. Yeah, so just watching the packaging and then going on when people think that they've gotten a good impression on it. Okay, so this is how you can watch the eye tracking and also get an idea on what people focus on first, which might be of interest. But then the idea was of our research question that people who know a brand focus longer on those brands, on known brands, as compared to unknown brands, unless you succeed in gathering people's attention with the packaging and countering these effects. So you might want to look at a little more quantitative data here. And I think that we should be able to show that in the platform here. So we have the 6 different smoothie types that were used in the study. And I will visualize the data for these here. This is the data analytics module. And you might want to look at the duration that people focused on the different smoothies and knowing which ones are the more familiar brands. These are smoothie 4 and smoothie 6. Then you might want to compare the duration that people have looked at the smoothies or at the packaging, and also the amount of fixations that these packages get. So we see that the first, or the smoothie number 1 is an innocent smoothie, which is a very, very famous brand. And we also see, interestingly, that the packages 2 to 5 get a very similar amount of attention. So even while the brand of number 4 is not very known, it gets a similar amount of attention than the known brands, while number 6, which is also a lesser known brand, does not get the same amount of attention. So you might be suspecting that people for brand 4, it was succeeded in countering the effect of people focusing more on familiar brands, whereas in packaging 6 you didn't. Of course, it is very important to also look at the questionnaire data and see how does that match these assumptions, and that's why we believe that in particular with eye tracking also it is very important to have other angles of looking at your research question to verify the hypothesis that you can derive from these. Another interesting observation is that while package 6, for example, receives less attention, less fixations than the other brands, we see that the fixation duration here is much higher than for the other tasks. So this is an interesting observation when we think back to what was presented in the beginning, that the processing duration is related to the time that people spend on an element, and in particular to fixation duration. So we might be suspecting that people need more effort, more time to process what they see relating to packaging 6 as compared to the other packages. So this is somewhat preliminary data. This study is going on, at the moment, but I think it is very interesting to hear combine the qualitative data from the eye tracking, from the questionnaires. Well, not questionnaires are quantitative, but to combine these different data sources with the eye tracking to get an impression of what attracts attention and how long it takes people to process these. So this is one use case that I wanted to present. Is there, are there more questions, Stefan?
No, there's just a more general question, but I'll follow up on that in the written way, and then maybe we can address it later.
Okay, good. Then I switch to the presentation again. So we've had the packaging test here, which is really from the domain of market research. I would like to present a second example from a usability test. Here, this is an example that we set up ourselves for illustration purposes. It's not a customer data. It's not customer data that we are presenting here. Just as a disclaimer, it is an IKEA example, and the question is, what functions and tools are customers expecting and using when configuring a piece of furniture in a web shop? For this study, we used qualitative eye tracking, a screen recording as you've just seen it, thinking aloud, task duration, and task completion. So have people been successful in what they actually wanted to achieve? So this study was also run within the platform, which means you design the test within the platform, compile it, and then people complete it on their mobile phones, as I have just explained for the packaging test. And subsequently, as soon as the first person has completed it, you can have a look at the data here. So for this test, it might be interesting to first have a look at the table and see what is going on. It is a test where people were first asked to select doors or look for doors for a couch table, a sofa table that they already had. There's an entire story around this. So you have already purchased this, this table, and now you're looking for doors for it because it has this section with shelves. So the first task is searching for these doors, and it is what you would also expect to take a little longer. And then the following 3 tasks for people are configuring these doors. So choosing a color, choosing a size, and a print of these doors. So these are all pretty basic tasks, and you would expect people to take roughly equal amount of times for these tasks because they're all pretty in one category and pretty basic. So it might be interesting to first look at duration of these tasks. And here we see that task 4 takes longer than the other tasks, which might be surprising to you. You also see that task 4 was not completed by one person, though you would have expected that it is a fairly basic task that everybody can do. So from this observation, it might be interesting to go into the replay of the different participants and focus in particular on task 4, where we've seen the problems arising. So you can have a look at the screen recording in itself, but actually, it's continuing. What we would like to have a look at is the gaze data with it. I choose a different one here and also a different replay speed to have it not too quickly. During this task, as I said, next to screen recordings and gaze tracking, tapping, we also recorded thinking out loud. And if you would be interested in that, you could click on this and then while analyzing the eye tracking data, actually having a look at what people are saying while they complete the task to compare that with where they are looking and see how that matches up and what the similarities are here. So in this task 4, I'll let you watch for a second before I go on talking. So what we observe in this task, and that's very similar across all the different testers, is that people look for the filter options at the top of the website, and there's a lot of back and forth scanning of people between the elements and the doors that they would like to purchase and the categories of the filters. So you might get the impression that people are actually looking for a particular filter for the wooden print or for print, which is not existing. So what you would actually want to do is, or what you would actually have to do on this IKEA website is that you go into the specific door that you want to buy that has been configured, and then only then you can change to the wooden print. But we see here again that there's a lot of confusion regarding how to get to this goal, particularly as we have seen in the tasks before that people have been very keen on using these filter options that we have above. So you might deduct from this that to make this entire process more smooth, people would be expecting a filter as well, which could be included in this design. This is, of course, like a fairly global task. You ask people to go through this shopping process and complete it like one task after the other, and look for where are there irregularities that are coming up. But of course, you can ask much more specific questions as well. And I believe the more specific you get, the more valuable the eye tracking becomes. Here you sort of by chance discover this filter issue that people have, and later on with a function you can also, in task 6, people are asked to select the amount of doors, and there's a similar thing where you find that people do not have the functionalities in the place that they expect them to be. But this is a finding sort of along the way. You weren't specifically interested in the filter functions when you designed this task. When you have a more specific task, and what we see, for example, is, for example, in the educational context, there are often loads of problems with people who cannot complete a task. And the question then is, have they actually read the entire task? Have they maybe spent sufficient amount of time? How many people have read the task? How long have they spent on these? Have they come back maybe and compared this task or the instructions to what they were actually supposed to perform? And with these metrics, then you can evaluate where the problem lies, for example, with is it that people don't understand the task, or is it in the completion of the task? just to give one other example. Another example that we see often is with fitness apps or health apps that you want people to perform certain exercises and make sure that they perform these correctly. So you give warnings, and the more warnings you have, then people get more and more blind to it. So you might want to evaluate, are people actually looking at these warnings to make sure that an application is used safely? So then you would be evaluating how many % of the people have actually looked at this warning, how much time have they spent on it, can I suspect from the time that they spend on it that they have actually processed it, and is that something that people refer back frequently to? Yeah, so also within the UX context, there are there's a great variety of questions that you might want to address, and depending on what the specific question is, it can be more quantitative or more qualitative, and both can be addressed. Also here, keeping in mind to use other approaches, as for example, thinking out loud, so people voicing their ideas, or questionnaires, rating scales that complement the eye tracking and make the interpretation easy, so that in the end, you know, if people have focused on something for very long, is that because they needed a long time to process it and make that sure, or is it because it was of particular interest to them? So for the actual interpretation, it is always very helpful to have different sources of data complementing the eye tracking. And with this, I would like to move to the third example, which is an example from the market research context again, where the question is, does a video ad actually increase intention for my product in a subsequent purchasing task? For this setting, we have used quantitative and qualitative eye tracking, questionnaires, task durations, again, and of course also purchasing decision, because that's might be what you're most interested in the end. Again, this is an example to illustrate how you can use eye tracking, and it's not a customer example. We have used a spot from Pepsi, and I just need a second to switch to this one. So this is our Pepsi example, just to give you some background. The experiment could actually be run as an A/B experiment. In the first phase of it, half of the people get a spot, an advertising spot video that you are interested in and that you actually want to test, and half of the people get a random different video spot to see. Then you could have a second task, which is totally not related to this advertisement and to what you're actually interested in, just to distract people a little from what they have done before and what they've seen before. And in a third task, you could be asking people to purchase something that relates to the brand that you have been looking at in the video. So in our example, we first have this Pepsi spot, then a different task, and in the last part of the experiment or of the study, people are asked to choose in a target web shop to either buy Pepsi or a different brand of soft drink. So I will let you see the video briefly. Again, a little slower than it would have actually been. And I scroll on because it's kind of long. We have this video here. It's also interesting to watch what people focus on in this video, because you can see a known effect that people focus on faces a lot, and yeah, also on the brand, of course. So that's the video. Actually, there's some music playing with it, which I have left out for this demo. Then there's a different task, and then you might want to ask people to complete a shopping task in which they select one of the brands, either what you have shown before or a different brand. So, and then subsequently, you might want to analyze how much attention did my my brand that I was advertising actually get in the purchasing task. And now the question might be, yeah, why would I actually be interested in how much attention people my brand receives? While what I actually want that people purchase it more. And that's, of course, what you would also be evaluating. Do people purchase it more? But for example, if you do not see this effect that people buy it more often subsequently, you would want to know what is the reason for this. Is it that the ad that you displayed did not increase attention to it? Or is it maybe that people do focus on it quite a lot, but still take a different decision in the end, which would be a completely different problem to address. So studying, for example, how long people focus on a product from the brand that you displayed, how long do they focus on different brands, and what is the difference between the two groups who have seen the spot and who have not seen the spot. So this might actually be very relevant in then deciding how you can act and increase the visibility. Yes. So this is the third use case that we prepared for this webinar, and it's almost time to finish. If there are no questions up to here, I would like to sum up the benefits that we think are really, really valuable about eye tracking. And the first one is something that has been only implicitly present, I think, during this short presentation. And that is that eye tracking helps you to build user empathy, because you see the product from the eyes of your users or your customers. You see what they focus on it, what seems relevant to them, where do they look first, what do they neglect. So you get a very detailed glimpse on this, much more detailed than you would get if you would just be doing the screen recording. It also allows you to compare attention between different designs. When you have different settings, it allows you to subsequently design smoother interactions by identifying assumptions that users might be having about your product and where to find certain functions. And it helps you establish the cause of failure in user interaction and purchasing decisions. Or yeah, what is of most interest to you with what you want to study. Yes, so that is the content that I have prepared for today. It is a very broad overview over eye tracking, but we are planning to host regular webinars where we go much deeper into different questions, as for example, what specifically is it that I analyze? What are metrics that I want to study? How do I set up such an experiment? What do I need into account, like take into account? What is a task that is particularly suitable? Yeah, I want to thank you for your attention and tuning into the webinar, and hope to see you again when we get into the more specific parts of eye tracking and of using eye tracking in the research process.